The millionaire whispered in Spanish during the meeting, and the janitor translated, "Everything on the spot. Get ready to witness one of the most incredible stories of hidden intelligence, cultural UE. Appearance or position, because the person cleaning your office might understand every word you're saying, and much more than you ever imagined. If you're ready to be inspired by this amazing story of respect, dignity, and the power of multilingual intelligence, make sure to hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of what's about to unfold. Now let's dive into this extraordinary story that will remind you why assumptions can be dangerous and respect should be universal. Chapter 1. The Invisible Presence. The glass-walled conference room on the 35th floor of Sterling Industries' Manhattan headquarters buzzed with the kind of high-stakes energy that accompanied billion-dollar negotiations. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the New York City skyline stretched endlessly, a testament to the power and influence wielded by the 12 executives gathered around the polished mahogany table. At the head of the table sat Ricardo Mendoza, the 60-year-old CEO and founder of Sterling Industries, one of the largest construction and real estate development companies in the United States. Born in Mexico City, but raised in Texas from age 12, Ricardo had built his empire through a combination of sharp business instincts, cultural connections, and the ability to navigate both American and Latin American markets with equal expertise. Today's meeting was perhaps the most important of Ricardo's career. Sterling Industries was negotiating a joint venture with 3 major investment firms to develop a series of luxury resorts across Mexico and Central America, a project worth over $2 billion that would cement Ricardo's status as one of the most powerful Latino businessmen in America. "Gentlemen," Ricardo began, addressing the assembled group of investors, lawyers, and senior executives, "this partnership represents not just a tremendous business opportunity, but a chance to demonstrate that American companies can work respectfully and profitably with our neighbors to the south." The other attendees included representatives from Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and Blackstone Group, along with Sterling Industries' senior management team. Each person in the room commanded annual salaries in the millions and possessed the kind of influence that could move markets with a single decision. But in the corner of the conference room, barely noticed by the powerful men discussing billions of dollars, stood Carmen Ruiz, the 58-year-old woman responsible for cleaning Sterling Industries' executive offices. Dressed in her standard navy blue maintenance uniform, Carmen moved quietly around the room's perimeter, emptying waste baskets and dusting furniture while the meeting proceeded. To the executives, Carmen was part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable and invisible as the heating system or security cameras. They had seen her cleaning their offices for over 6 years without ever engaging in conversation beyond perfunctory greetings or requests to clean up specific messes. What none of them knew was that Carmen Ruiz possessed one of the most sophisticated intellects in the building. Born in Guatemala City in 1965, Carmen had earned a master's degree in international relations from Universidad de San Carlos before working for 10 years as a translator and cultural liaison for the Guatemalan Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She was fluent in Spanish, English, Portuguese, and French, with conversational ability in Italian and German. But political instability in Guatemala during the 1990s had forced Carmen to flee to the United States with her teenage daughter, leaving behind her career and starting over in New York City with no way to verify her credentials or continue her professional work. Like many highly educated immigrants, she had taken whatever employment was available while trying to rebuild her life in a new country. For the past 6 years, Carmen had cleaned offices while listening to business conversations, merger discussions, and strategic planning sessions that utilized exactly the kind of international expertise she had spent decades developing. But her insights and knowledge remained invisible to executives who saw only a cleaning lady and made assumptions about everything else. As the meeting progressed, Carmen continued her work while absorbing every detail of the negotiation. She understood not only the English being spoken by most participants, but also the cultural and political subtleties that the American investors were missing in their analysis of Latin American markets. The regulatory environment in Mexico has become much more favorable to foreign investment, announced James Wilson, a senior partner from Goldman Sachs. Our analysis suggests minimal political risk for American companies operating in the hospitality sector. Carmen almost smiled at this assessment, which demonstrated exactly the kind of surface-level understanding that often led American companies into expensive mistakes. Mexican regulatory policy was indeed favorable on paper, but implementation varied dramatically by region and was heavily influenced by local political relationships that couldn't be understood through financial analysis alone. I agree with James's assessment, added Michael Thompson from Deutsche Bank. The Mexican market represents an excellent opportunity for high-return investments with manageable risk profiles. But Carmen knew from her professional experience and ongoing connections with Central American colleagues that several recent policy changes had created complications that American investors typically failed to anticipate. Moreover, the cultural dynamics involved in luxury resort development required much more sophisticated understanding than most American companies possessed. Ricardo Mendoza, despite his Mexican heritage, had lived in the United States for so long that his understanding of current Latin American business culture was more theoretical than practical. He was approaching these markets as an American businessman of Latino descent, rather than someone with deep, current knowledge of regional politics and cultural sensitivities. As the meeting continued, Carmen noticed increasing signs that the negotiation was heading toward agreements that could prove problematic for all parties involved. The American investors were making assumptions about market conditions, regulatory stability, and cultural acceptance that weren't supported by current realities in the target countries. Most concerning to Carmen was the complete absence of input from anyone with recent direct experience in the Central American markets where most of the development was planned. The executives were making billion-dollar decisions based on financial projections and market research that failed to account for crucial political and cultural factors. But Carmen remained silent, continuing to empty trash cans and dust furniture while watching intelligent people make potentially expensive mistakes due to cultural blind spots and incomplete information. She had learned over 6 years of working in corporate environments that speaking up about business matters, even when she possessed relevant expertise, would be viewed as inappropriate. Overstepping by a maintenance worker, her insights, no matter how valuable, would be dismissed because of assumptions about her role and capabilities. As the formal meeting concluded and the participants prepared to move to the executive dining room for lunch, Carmen began collecting the documents and materials that would be left behind. But she knew that the most important conversations would continue during the informal lunch discussion, where the real decisions would be made and the final terms negotiated. What none of the executives realized was that Carmen's most valuable knowledge, her understanding of current Latin American politics, cultural sensitivities, and business practices, was about to become crucial to saving them from a series of costly mistakes, and the moment when her invisible presence would become impossible to ignore was approaching faster than anyone could have predicted. Chapter 2. The Assumptions. During the lunch break, the 12 executives moved to Sterling Industries' private dining room, where the real negotiation would take place in the more relaxed atmosphere that often facilitated final agreements. Carmen followed to continue her cleaning duties, setting up the room and preparing to serve the catered meal while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. The dining room was designed to impress, with original artwork, crystal chandeliers, and panoramic views of Central Park that reminded visitors of Sterling Industries' success and influence. But more importantly for today's negotiation, the room's intimate setting encouraged the kind of candid conversation that was difficult in formal conference rooms. As Carmen arranged place settings and prepared serving stations, she listened to the continuing discussion about the Latin American resort development project. The conversation had shifted from formal presentations to more honest assessments of concerns, opportunities, and potential complications. "Ricardo, I have to be frank with you," said David Park from Blackstone Group as he settled into his chair. "Our board is enthusiastic about this project, but they're concerned about political stability in some of the target markets. Guatemala and Honduras particularly worry them." Ricardo nodded understandingly. though Carmen could tell from his body language that he didn't fully grasp the specific concerns David was referencing. "David, I understand those concerns, but I think they're based on outdated perceptions. These countries have made tremendous progress in creating business-friendly environments." Carmen knew that Ricardo's assessment was partially correct, but missed crucial nuances about recent political developments that could significantly impact large-scale foreign investments. The business environment had indeed improved in some areas, but new complications had emerged that weren't reflected in the reports the American investors were relying on. "What's your assessment of corruption risks?" asked Jennifer Martinez from Goldman Sachs. "Our compliance department requires detailed analysis of potential regulatory complications. Corruption is obviously a consideration in any international development project," Ricardo replied, "but our legal team has identified reliable local partners who can navigate the regulatory environment effectively." As Carmen served the first course, she could see that the American investors were seeking reassurance about risks they didn't fully understand, while Ricardo was providing confidence based on analysis that wasn't comprehensive enough to address their actual concerns. The conversation continued for another hour, with both sides dancing around the cultural and political complexities that neither group fully comprehended. The Americans were worried about problems they couldn't clearly articulate, while Ricardo was offering solutions to problems he hadn't completely identified. But it was during coffee service that the meeting took a turn that would expose the dangerous assumptions underlying their entire negotiation. Michael Thompson from Deutsche Bank received a phone call that required him to step out of the dining room briefly. When he returned, he approached Ricardo and began speaking in what he apparently believed was confidential Spanish. "Ricardo, tengo que decirte algo confidencial," Michael said quietly, moving close to Ricardo's chair. "Ricardo, I need to tell you something confidential." Carmen froze while refilling water glasses, realizing that Michael was about to reveal information that could fundamentally change the dynamics of the negotiation. "Nuestros socios en Deutsche Bank están preocupados de que tú no entiendas realmente los mercados latinoamericanos tan bien como dices," Michael continued in Spanish. "Piensan que has estado demasiado tiempo en Estados Unidos y has perdido contacto con las realidades locales. Our partners at Deutsche Bank are worried that you don't really understand Latin American markets as well as you claim. They think you've been in the United States too long and have lost touch with local realities." Ricardo's expression tightened as he processed this unexpected revelation. Michael was essentially telling him that his German banking partners questioned his cultural expertise, the very foundation of his value proposition for this project. "También," Michael continued, apparently confident that their Spanish conversation was private, "hay rumores de que algunos de tus contactos gubernamentales en México no son tan influyentes como has sugerido. Nuestro equipo de investigación ha encontrado información que contradice algunas de tus afirmaciones sobre conexiones políticas. Also, there are rumors that some of your government contacts in Mexico aren't as influential as you've suggested. Our research team has found information that contradicts some of your claims about political connections." Carmen continued her work while absorbing every word of this devastating conversation. Michael was revealing that Deutsche Bank had conducted independent research that questioned both Ricardo's cultural expertise and his claimed political relationships, the two primary assets that Sterling Industries was bringing to the partnership. But the most damaging revelation was yet to come. "Finalmente," Michael said, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard, "mi jefe me pidió que te dijera que si este proyecto falla debido a problemas culturales o políticos que no anticipaste, Deutsche Bank va a culparte públicamente por información inexacta. No podemos permitir que nuestros clientes piensen que no investigamos adecuadamente a nuestros socios. Finally, my boss asked me to tell you that if this project fails due to cultural or political problems you didn't anticipate, Deutsche Bank is going to blame you publicly for inaccurate information. We can't allow our clients to think we didn't adequately research our partners." The threat was clear. Deutsche Bank was prepared to make Ricardo a scapegoat if their Latin American investments encountered the kind of cultural and political complications that Carmen knew were highly likely given their superficial understanding of current market conditions. Ricardo's face had gone pale as he realized that his supposed partners was simultaneously questioning his expertise and preparing to blame him for any failures that resulted from that questioned expertise. But what neither Ricardo nor Michael realized was that their confidential Spanish conversation had been completely understood by the woman refilling their water glasses, someone who possessed exactly the kind of current, comprehensive knowledge of Latin American politics and culture that could address all of their concerns. Carmen had not only understood every word of their exchange, but she also knew that both men were operating with incomplete and sometimes inaccurate information that could lead to exactly the kind of expensive failures they were trying to avoid. The moment of revelation was approaching, and it would shatter every assumption that the executives in the room had made about knowledge, expertise, and the value of the people they barely noticed. Chapter 3. The Revelation. As the lunch meeting continued, the tension between Ricardo and the investment partners became increasingly evident, despite their attempts to maintain professional courtesy. Michael Thompson's revelations in Spanish had clearly shaken Ricardo's confidence, while the American investors seemed to sense that something had shifted in the negotiation dynamics. Carmen finished her serving duties and began clearing dishes, while the conversation grew more strained. She could see that both sides were now approaching the partnership with suspicion rather than enthusiasm, each questioning the other's capabilities and motivations. "Ricardo, before we proceed with final terms," said James Wilson from Goldman Sachs, "I think we need to address some due diligence questions that have come up in our background research." "Of course," Ricardo replied, though his voice carried less confidence than it had earlier in the day. "What specific concerns would you like to discuss?" David Park from Blackstone Group consulted his notes. "Our research team has identified some discrepancies between your descriptions of regulatory environments in target countries and recent reports from our Latin American consultants." Carmen knew that the discrepancies were likely the result of American consultants relying on outdated information and superficial analysis, but she also knew that Ricardo's responses would be inadequate because his own knowledge, while superior to the Americans, was still insufficient for the complex realities of current Central American business environments. "I'd be happy to address any specific concerns," Ricardo said, but Carmen could hear the defensiveness in his voice that suggested he wasn't entirely confident in his information either. The meeting was deteriorating into mutual suspicion and inadequate information, exactly the kind of situation that led to failed international partnerships and expensive mistakes for all parties involved. It was at this moment that Carmen made a decision that would change everything. Instead of remaining invisible while watching intelligent people make preventable errors, she would finally use her expertise to provide the accurate information they desperately needed. Carmen set down the water pitcher she had been carrying and walked directly to the conference table where the 12 executives were sitting. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said in clear, unaccented English that immediately surprised everyone in the room. "I couldn't help but notice that your discussion about Latin American markets is based on some inaccurate information that could lead to serious problems for all of you." The silence that followed was so complete that Carmen could hear the air conditioning system and the distant sound of Manhattan traffic 35 floors below. Ricardo stared at Carmen with confusion and growing alarm, realizing that she had apparently understood his Spanish conversation with Michael Thompson. The investment representatives looked equally bewildered by the intervention of someone they had assumed was just part of the building's maintenance staff. "I'm sorry," said Michael Thompson, "but who are you, and why are you interrupting our business meeting?" "My name is Carmen Ruiz," she replied calmly, "and I'm the person who has been cleaning your offices for the past 6 years while listening to dozens of discussions about international business deals that were based on incomplete cultural and political understanding." She paused to let this information sink in, then continued with the quiet authority of someone who possessed expertise that others desperately needed. "I have a master's degree in international relations from Universidad de San Carlos in Guatemala, and I worked for 10 years as a translator and cultural liaison for the Guatemalan Ministry of Foreign Affairs before immigrating to the United States." The executives exchanged glances, clearly trying to process the fact that the woman they had barely noticed for 6 years was revealing herself to be exactly the kind of expert they had been seeking for their Latin American project. "More importantly," Carmen continued, "I understood every word of the Spanish conversation between Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Thompson, and I can tell you that both of your assessments of current political and cultural conditions in Central America are significantly inaccurate. Ricardo's face had gone from pale to red as he realized that Carmen had heard Michael's devastating critique of his expertise and his admission that Deutsche Bank was prepared to blame him for any project failures. "Mr. Thompson," Carmen said, turning to address Michael directly, "when you told Mr. Mendoza in Spanish that Deutsche Bank questions his understanding of Latin American markets, you were correct to be concerned. But your own bank's research is based on consultants who haven't lived in these countries recently and don't understand current political dynamics." Michael Thompson looked like he had been struck by lightning. Not only had Carmen understood his supposedly confidential conversation, but she was now revealing the contents to the entire group while simultaneously critiquing the accuracy of his information. "And Mr. Mendoza," Carmen continued, "when you claim to understand Mexican regulatory environments, you're drawing on knowledge that's 15 years out of date. The political relationships you're counting on are no longer relevant, and the regulatory processes have changed in ways that could cost your investors millions of dollars." The room remained silent as Carmen systematically dismantled the assumptions that had been driving their billion-dollar negotiation. "But most importantly," Carmen said, addressing the entire group, "you're all approaching Latin American markets with the kind of cultural arrogance that ensures failure. You're treating these countries as business opportunities to be exploited rather than complex societies with their own priorities, concerns, and decision-making processes." She moved to the whiteboard at the front of the room and began writing, outlining the specific political changes, regulatory modifications, and cultural considerations that were missing from their analysis. "If you proceed with your current approach," Carmen concluded, "this project will fail expensively and publicly, damaging the reputations of everyone involved and reinforcing negative stereotypes about American companies in Latin American markets." When Carmen finished speaking, the 12 executives, each of whom controlled billions of dollars in investment capital, sat in stunned silence, realizing that the most valuable expertise in the room had been provided by someone they had never bothered to notice or acknowledge. The woman they had dismissed as invisible had just revealed herself to be the expert they had been desperately seeking, and in the process, she had exposed the dangerous inadequacy of their own knowledge and assumptions. Chapter 4. The Expertise. The silence that followed Carmen's revelation stretched for nearly a minute as the 12 executives processed the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The cleaning lady, who had been invisible to them for 6 years, had not only understood confidential conversations in Spanish, but had also demonstrated knowledge of Latin American politics and business culture that exceeded anything their expensive consultants had provided. Ricardo Mendoza was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Carmen, how much have you understood of our business discussions?" "Mr. Mendoza, I have understood every conversation that has taken place in these offices for the past 6 years," Carmen replied directly. "I have listened to merger negotiations, acquisition discussions, personnel decisions, and strategic planning sessions, while you and your colleagues assume that the woman cleaning your offices was incapable of comprehending business matters." The implications of Carmen's statement were staggering. Every confidential conversation, every sensitive negotiation, every strategic plan discussed in Sterling Industries' executive offices had been overheard and understood by someone the executives had never considered worth acknowledging. David Park from Blackstone Group leaned forward with obvious fascination. "Ms. Ruiz, when you said our analysis of Latin American markets was inaccurate, what specifically were you referring to?" Carmen moved to the whiteboard and began outlining information that none of their consultants had provided. "Mr. Park, your assessment of political stability in Guatemala is based on data that's 18 months old. Since then, there have been 3 significant changes in ministerial leadership that have altered the regulatory environment for foreign investment." She wrote specific names and dates on the whiteboard, demonstrating knowledge that was both current and detailed. "The mining regulations that your consultants cited as favorable to development projects were modified 6 months ago in ways that specifically impact hospitality, infrastructure development." Michael Thompson, still recovering from the shock of realizing that Carmen had understood his Spanish conversation, managed to ask, How do you have access to such current information? Mr. Thompson, I maintain contact with former colleagues throughout Central America who work in government and international business, Carmen replied. Unlike your consultants who visit these countries occasionally and rely on official reports, I have daily access to people who understand the practical realities of how policies are actually implemented. Carmen continued her analysis, systematically addressing each concern that had been raised during the negotiation. Her knowledge was comprehensive, current, and precisely relevant to the challenges they were facing. The resort development project you're proposing will require environmental impact assessments that have become much more stringent in the past year, she explained. The timeline you've projected doesn't account for new requirements that could delay construction by 12 to 18 months. More importantly, Carmen continued, your approach to community relations will create exactly the kind of local opposition that has derailed similar projects. You're planning to build luxury resorts in areas where local communities have strong feelings about foreign companies extracting profits without providing meaningful benefits to residents. James Wilson from Goldman Sachs was taking notes furiously. Ms. Ruiz, what would you recommend as alternative approaches to community engagement? Mr. Wilson, successful development in these markets requires genuine partnership with local communities, not just compliance with legal requirements, Carmen replied. You need to demonstrate that your projects will provide long-term benefits to local populations, not just temporary construction jobs followed by service positions with limited advancement opportunities. Carmen's recommendations revealed a sophisticated understanding of both business development and cultural sensitivity that none of the executives had encountered from their expensive consulting firms. But the most fundamental problem with your approach, Carmen said, addressing the entire group, is that you're trying to impose American business models on Latin American markets without understanding how those models need to be adapted for different cultural and political environments. She outlined specific examples of how successful international development required cultural intelligence that went far beyond language skills or surface-level awareness of local customs. Mr. Mendoza, Carmen said, turning to Ricardo, your Mexican heritage is valuable, but you've been in the United States long enough that your understanding of current Mexican business culture is more theoretical than practical. You're approaching these markets as an American businessman of Latino descent, rather than someone with deep, current knowledge of regional realities. Ricardo nodded slowly, recognizing the accuracy of Carmen's assessment, despite its uncomfortable implications for his role in the project. And Mr. Thompson, Carmen continued, Deutsche Bank's concerns about Mr. Mendoza's expertise are valid, but your own research is based on the same kind of superficial analysis that creates the problems you're trying to avoid. The executives were beginning to understand that Carmen possessed exactly the kind of comprehensive current knowledge that could make their project successful or prevent the expensive failures that seemed increasingly likely given their current approach. Ms. Ruiz, said Jennifer Martinez from Goldman Sachs, would you be willing to serve as a consultant for this project? It's clear that your expertise is exactly what we need to navigate these markets successfully. Carmen looked around the table at the 12 executives who had ignored her existence for 6 years, but were now seeking her expertise because they finally understood its value. Ms. Martinez, I would be willing to help, Carmen replied, but only if you're prepared to fundamentally change your approach to international business development and genuinely respect the cultural knowledge required for success in these markets. The negotiation that had been heading toward failure based on incomplete information and cultural misunderstanding was about to be transformed by the expertise of someone who had been present all along, waiting for the humility and recognition that would allow her knowledge to benefit everyone involved. Chapter 5. The Transformation. The atmosphere in Sterling Industries' executive dining room had been completely transformed by Carmen's revelation. What had begun as a tense negotiation between suspicious partners had evolved into an educational session where 12 powerful executives listened with genuine respect to someone whose expertise they had never recognized, despite working in the same building for 6 years. Carmen spent the next hour systematically addressing each aspect of their Latin American development project, providing insights that revealed both the inadequacy of their current approach and the path toward genuine success in international markets. The first thing you need to understand, Carmen explained while sketching organizational charts on the whiteboard, is that successful business development in Latin America requires long-term relationship building, not just legal compliance and financial investment. She outlined how American companies that succeeded in the region approached community engagement, government relations, and local partnerships in ways that created mutual benefit rather than one-sided extraction of profits. Your current timeline assumes that you can complete regulatory approvals, environmental assessments, and community agreements simultaneously, Carmen continued. But in practice, these processes are sequential and interdependent in ways that your consultants haven't explained. David Park from Blackstone Group was studying Carmen's diagrams with obvious fascination. Ms. Ruiz, this level of detail about operational realities isn't available in any of the consulting reports we've received. How do we access this kind of practical knowledge for future projects? Mr. Park, this knowledge exists throughout the immigrant communities in major American cities, Carmen replied. Thousands of people who work in service positions, maintenance jobs, and entry-level roles possess exactly this kind of expertise based on their professional experience in their home countries. The implications of Carmen's statement were profound. The executives were beginning to realize that valuable knowledge about international markets existed all around them in people they had never bothered to notice or acknowledge. "Are you saying," asked Michael Thompson, "that we could be accessing this expertise systematically, rather than relying exclusively on expensive consulting firms?" "Mr. Thompson, I'm saying that cultural intelligence requires ongoing relationships with people who understand local contexts, not just periodic reports from outsiders who visit occasionally," Carmen replied. "The most accurate information about business conditions in Guatemala comes from Guatemalans who maintain connections with their home country, not from American consultants who spend 2 weeks conducting interviews." Carmen's analysis extended beyond their specific project to fundamental questions about how American companies approached international business development. "Your consulting firms charge enormous fees to provide information that's often less accurate and less current than knowledge possessed by immigrants who work in your buildings every day," she continued. "But you never access that knowledge because you make assumptions about people's capabilities based on their current job titles." Ricardo Mendoza, who had been largely silent since Carmen's initial revelation, finally spoke up. "Carmen, I have to ask you something directly. If you possess this level of expertise about international business, why have you been working as a cleaning lady for 6 years?" Carmen's answer revealed the complex realities faced by many highly educated immigrants. "Mr. Mendoza, when I arrived in the United States, my Guatemalan credentials weren't recognized by American employers. My accent made some people uncomfortable. My foreign education was viewed as inferior to American degrees, and my expertise in Latin American politics was seen as irrelevant to American business." She paused to let this sink in, then continued with quiet dignity. "So I took the work that was available while supporting my daughter and trying to establish myself in a new country. But I never stopped learning, thinking, or maintaining the professional knowledge that I had spent decades developing." The executives were beginning to understand that Carmen's situation was not unique, that many immigrants with valuable expertise were working in positions that didn't utilize their knowledge because of systemic barriers to recognition and opportunity. "Carmen," said Jennifer Martinez from Goldman Sachs, "if we were to engage you as a consultant for this project, what would be your recommendations for ensuring its success?" Carmen returned to the whiteboard and began outlining a comprehensive strategy that addressed not only the technical aspects of resort development, but also the cultural and political considerations that determine success or failure in international markets. "First, you need to establish genuine partnerships with local communities before you begin any development activities," she said. "This means spending time in the target areas, listening to local concerns, and designing projects that address community priorities as well as investor returns. Second, you need to hire local professionals in leadership roles, not just as support staff. The most successful international developments are led by people who understand local contexts and can navigate cultural and political complexities. Third, you need to commit to long-term presence in these markets rather than treating them as opportunities for quick profit extraction." Communities can distinguish between companies that are genuinely invested in regional development and those that are simply seeking to exploit local resources. Carmen's recommendations revealed a level of strategic thinking that impressed even the most experienced executives in the room. But most importantly, Carmen concluded, you need to recognize that successful international business requires cultural humility. You have to acknowledge that your American business approaches need to be adapted for different cultural contexts, and that adaptation requires expertise that you can't develop overnight. As Carmen finished her presentation, the 12 executives found themselves in the unusual position of recognizing that the most valuable business advice they had received in years had come from someone they had never bothered to notice or acknowledge. The woman who had been invisible to them for 6 years had just demonstrated knowledge and capabilities that could transform their understanding of international business development and save them from expensive mistakes that seemed inevitable under their original approach. But more importantly, Carmen had opened their eyes to the reality that valuable expertise existed all around them in people whose knowledge they had never bothered to seek or recognize. Chapter 6. The Opportunity. By late afternoon, the negotiation that had begun with mutual suspicion and inadequate information had been completely transformed by Carmen's expertise. The 12 executives were no longer questioning each other's capabilities. Instead, they were working together to develop a new approach to Latin American development that incorporated Carmen's cultural and political insights. Ricardo Mendoza had undergone the most dramatic change in perspective. Instead of defending expertise he didn't fully possess, he was now acknowledging the limitations of his knowledge and seeking guidance from someone who clearly understood current regional realities better than he did. "Carmen," Ricardo said during a brief break in their planning session, "I owe you an apology that goes beyond today's meeting. For 6 years I've seen you cleaning our offices without ever recognizing that you possessed exactly the kind of knowledge that could have helped us avoid dozens of costly mistakes. Mr. Mendoza, apologies are meaningful only when they lead to changed behavior," Carmen replied with the same directness she had shown throughout the afternoon. "The question is whether you're willing to systematically value expertise regardless of where you find it." David Park from Blackstone Group had been taking extensive notes throughout Carmen's presentation. "Ms. Ruiz, I want to make you a formal offer. Would you be willing to join our Latin American development team as Director of Cultural Strategy? We clearly need someone with your expertise to guide our international expansion." But Carmen's response surprised him. "Mr. Park, I appreciate the offer, but I think you're still missing the broader point. The problem isn't just that you need one expert consultant. The problem is that your entire approach to identifying and utilizing expertise is based on assumptions that cause you to overlook valuable knowledge." She gestured toward the window overlooking Manhattan. "In this city alone, there are thousands of immigrants working in service positions who possess exactly the kind of cultural and professional expertise that American companies need for international success. But you'll never access that knowledge if you only value certain types of credentials and backgrounds." Michael Thompson from Deutsche Bank leaned forward with obvious interest. "What are you suggesting specifically?" "I'm suggesting that successful international business requires systematic cultural intelligence, not just periodic consultation with individual experts," Carmen replied. "You need to create ongoing relationships with people who understand different markets and cultures, and you need to value that knowledge regardless of people's current job titles or formal credentials." Carmen's recommendation was revolutionary in its implications for how American companies approached international business development. "Mr. Thompson, your bank spends millions of dollars annually on consulting firms that provide less accurate information than you could obtain from immigrants who work in your buildings and maintain connections with their home countries," she continued. "But you never seek their input because you assume that valuable knowledge only comes from people with specific titles and educational backgrounds." Jennifer Martinez from Goldman Sachs was beginning to understand the broader implications of Carmen's proposal. "Are you talking about creating formal programs to identify and develop expertise among all employees, regardless of their current positions?" "Exactly," Carmen confirmed. "The most successful international companies are those that recognize expertise wherever it exists and create systems for utilizing that knowledge effectively. She outlined a comprehensive approach to cultural intelligence that would transform how American companies engaged with international markets. Instead of relying exclusively on expensive consulting firms, you could establish advisory networks that include immigrants, expatriates, and international professionals who understand local contexts, Carmen explained. These networks would provide more accurate, more current, and more actionable information than traditional consulting relationships. The executives were beginning to realize that Carmen was proposing not just a solution to their immediate project, but a fundamental change in how they approached international business development. "Carmen," said James Wilson from Goldman Sachs, "what you're describing would represent a significant cultural shift for American companies. Are you willing to help us implement this kind of systematic change?" Carmen considered the question carefully. For 6 years, she had watched these executives make preventable mistakes while possessing knowledge that could have helped them succeed. Now they were finally ready to listen and learn from expertise they had previously ignored. "I would be willing to help," Carmen said finally, "but only if you're committed to genuine change rather than superficial modifications. This isn't about hiring one immigrant consultant to check a diversity box. It's about fundamentally changing how you value and utilize human knowledge." "What would that commitment look like?" asked Ricardo Mendoza. "It would mean creating formal programs to identify expertise among all employees, establishing ongoing relationships with cultural advisors from target markets, and most importantly, changing your assumptions about whose knowledge is valuable," Carmen replied. "It would also mean acknowledging that cultural intelligence is just as important as financial intelligence for international success, and investing in developing that intelligence systematically rather than hoping to acquire it through occasional consulting relationships." The proposal Carmen was outlining would require the executives to acknowledge that their traditional approaches to international business were inadequate, and that success required knowledge they didn't currently possess. But the alternative, continuing with their current approach, seemed certain to result in the kind of expensive failures that Carmen had predicted with such accuracy. "Carmen," said David Park, "if we agreed to implement the kind of systematic cultural intelligence program you're describing, would you be willing to lead that initiative?" Carmen looked around the table at 12 executives who had finally recognized the value of expertise they had ignored for 6 years. "Mr. Park, I would be honored to lead that initiative," she replied, "but I want to be clear about something. This program won't just benefit your international business development. It will transform how you understand and utilize the human potential that exists throughout your organization." The negotiation that had begun with inadequate information and mutual suspicion was concluding with a commitment to systematic change that would benefit not only the immediate project, but the long-term success of all the companies involved. And the catalyst for that transformation had been someone whose expertise had been present all along, waiting for the recognition and respect that would allow her knowledge to benefit everyone around her. Chapter 7. The Implementation. 6 months after Carmen's dramatic revelation in the Sterling Industries boardroom, the Latin American Resort Development Project had become a model for successful international business collaboration. Under Carmen's guidance as Director of Cultural Intelligence, the partnership had not only avoided the costly mistakes that seemed inevitable under their original approach, but had achieved breakthroughs in community relations and regulatory approval that exceeded everyone's expectations. The transformation had begun immediately after their initial meeting, when Carmen had insisted on visiting each target location to establish direct relationships with local communities, government officials, and business leaders before any formal development activities commenced. The first rule of successful international development, Carmen had explained to the project team during their planning phase, is that communities must see genuine benefit from foreign investment, not just temporary economic activity followed by profit extraction. Working with local partners that Carmen had identified through her professional networks, the development team had designed resort projects that incorporated community priorities, environmental sustainability, and long-term economic development, rather than focusing solely on investor returns. The results had been remarkable. In Guatemala, what had originally been conceived as a luxury resort, accessible only to wealthy international tourists, had evolved into a comprehensive ecotourism development that provided permanent employment for local residents, funded educational programs for community children, and preserved important ecological areas while generating substantial profits for investors. Carmen's approach has completely changed how we think about international development. David Park from Blackstone Group had told a business journal interviewing him about the project's success. Instead of imposing American business models on foreign markets, we're creating genuine partnerships that benefit everyone involved. But the impact of Carmen's expertise extended far beyond the specific resort project. The systematic cultural intelligence program she had developed for the partnership companies had transformed how they approached all international business activities. Sterling Industries had established a cultural advisory network that included immigrants and international professionals from every major market where the company operated. Instead of relying exclusively on expensive consulting firms, they now had ongoing access to current practical knowledge about political developments, cultural sensitivities, and business opportunities in dozens of countries. We discovered that our most valuable market intelligence was coming from people who were already working for our company, Ricardo Mendoza had explained during a presentation at the International Business Council. We just hadn't been asking for their input because we made assumptions about whose knowledge was relevant to business strategy. The Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and Blackstone Group had implemented similar programs, creating systematic approaches to identifying and utilizing cultural expertise among their employees and professional networks. The results had exceeded their most optimistic projections. Investment returns had improved because projects were designed with better understanding of local markets. Regulatory complications had decreased because cultural advisors helped navigate political sensitivities that traditional consultants missed. Most importantly, their international partnerships had become genuinely collaborative rather than exploitative. Carmen didn't just help us succeed in Latin American markets, Michael Thompson from Deutsche Bank had reported to his board of directors. She taught us how to recognize and utilize expertise that exists throughout our organization but wasn't being accessed because of our assumptions about whose knowledge mattered. The impact of Carmen's work had attracted attention from academic institutions and international development organizations who wanted to understand how systematic cultural intelligence could improve business outcomes while respecting local communities and cultures. Harvard Business School had invited Carmen to teach a course on cultural intelligence in international business development, where she shared her methodology with MBA students who would eventually lead multinational corporations. The most expensive mistakes in international business, Carmen told her Harvard students, are caused by cultural arrogance and inadequate local knowledge. Companies spend billions of dollars trying to impose their home market approaches on foreign contexts instead of adapting their strategies based on genuine understanding of local realities. The United Nations had also engaged Carmen to develop cultural intelligence protocols for international development projects, recognizing that her approach could improve outcomes for both investors and local communities. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition had come from the immigrant communities in New York City, who saw Carmen as proof that their knowledge and expertise could be valued and utilized in American business environments. Carmen's success has inspired all of us, said Dr. Maria Santos, a former professor from Columbia who was working as a home health aide while trying to rebuild her career. She proved that our professional knowledge and cultural expertise are valuable assets, not just personal background that doesn't matter in American workplaces. Carmen had used her new position and influence to create mentorship programs that helped other highly educated immigrants translate their expertise into American business opportunities. The programs had already helped dozens of former doctors, lawyers, engineers, and professors transition from service positions to professional roles that utilized their education and experience. My goal was never just personal success, Carmen explained during a keynote speech at the National Immigration Forum. My goal was to demonstrate that immigrants bring valuable knowledge and capabilities that can benefit American businesses and communities if we're given opportunities to contribute our expertise. Standing before an audience of business leaders, government officials, and immigrant advocacy organizations, Carmen reflected on the journey that had taken her from cleaning offices to leading international business development initiatives. 6 years ago, I was invisible to the executives whose offices I cleaned every day, she said. They saw my uniform and made assumptions about everything else, my intelligence, my education, my knowledge, my potential contributions to their business success. But the knowledge was always there, Carmen continued. The expertise, the cultural understanding, the language skills, the professional experience, all of it was present and available if they had been humble enough to recognize it and wise enough to ask for it. The audience responded with sustained applause, recognizing not just Carmen's individual success, but the broader principle she represented, that valuable human potential existed everywhere, waiting to be recognized and developed by leaders who were secure. Enough to acknowledge that expertise came in many forms, Carmen had not just transformed her own life, she had proven that assumptions about people's capabilities were not only morally wrong, but economically expensive, and that the most successful organizations were those that recognized and utilized human potential, regardless of where they found it. Chapter 8. The Legacy. 2 years after her transformation from invisible janitor to internationally recognized expert, Carmen Ruiz stood before the United Nations General Assembly, delivering the opening address for the Global Conference on Cultural Intelligence and International Development. The woman who had once cleaned offices while her expertise went unrecognized was now setting policy for how international organizations could better utilize cultural knowledge to achieve more effective and equitable development outcomes. Distinguished delegates, Carmen began, her voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall where representatives from 193 countries had gathered to learn from her methodology. We are here today because the traditional approaches to international business and development have failed to achieve their potential for creating mutual prosperity and genuine partnership between nations and cultures. The conference had been organized specifically to address Carmen's work, which had demonstrated that systematic cultural intelligence could simultaneously improve business outcomes and strengthen community development in ways that benefited all stakeholders. Over the past 2 years, the Latin American resort project that had begun with mutual suspicion and inadequate information had grown into a network of sustainable developments across 6 countries. Each project had been designed using Carmen's cultural intelligence methodology, resulting in developments that preserved local cultures, protected environmental resources, and created long-term economic opportunities for local communities, while generating substantial returns for international investors. The key insight that has guided our work, Carmen continued, is that sustainable international development requires genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared benefit, rather than extraction models that prioritize short-term profit over long-term relationship building. In the audience, Ricardo Mendoza listened with obvious pride as his former employee explained principles that had transformed not only his company, but his entire understanding of effective leadership and international business. Sterling Industries had become a case study for how systematic cultural intelligence could improve business outcomes while strengthening community relationships. Under Carmen's guidance, the company had expanded successfully into 12 international markets, each time using her methodology to establish genuine partnerships rather than imposing American business models on foreign contexts. Carmen's leadership has taught us that the most successful businesses are those that recognize and develop human potential, regardless of where they find it, Ricardo had told Forbes magazine in an interview about Sterling Industries' international expansion. We discovered that our most valuable asset wasn't our financial capital. It was our human capital, once we learned how to recognize and utilize it effectively. The other investment firms involved in the original partnership had achieved similar transformations. Goldman Sachs had established cultural intelligence centers in 15 major cities, staffed by immigrants and international professionals who provided real-time market analysis and cultural guidance for international investments. Deutsche Bank had created a global expertise network that connected international professionals throughout their organization, enabling them to access current cultural and political knowledge for any market where they operated. Blackstone Group had developed a systematic approach to identifying cultural expertise among their employees and professional networks, resulting in more accurate market analysis and more successful international partnerships. But Carmen's influence extended far beyond the business world. Her methodology had been adopted by international development organizations, educational institutions, and government agencies seeking to improve their effectiveness in multicultural environments. Harvard Business School had created the Carmen Ruiz Center for Cultural Intelligence, where graduate students learned systematic approaches to recognizing and utilizing cultural expertise in international business contexts. The World Bank had implemented Carmen's protocols for international development projects, requiring systematic cultural analysis and genuine community partnership for all major initiatives. Most importantly for Carmen personally, her success had inspired systematic changes in how American companies recognized and developed talent among immigrant employees and multicultural communities. The Carmen Ruiz effect, as business journals had begun calling it, referred to the growing recognition among American companies that valuable expertise existed throughout their organizations in people whose knowledge had been overlooked because of assumptions about credentials, backgrounds, and job titles. Hundreds of companies had established programs to identify and develop cultural expertise among their employees, resulting in better international business outcomes and more effective utilization of human potential. What Carmen demonstrated, said Dr. James Wilson, who had left Goldman Sachs to establish a consulting firm specializing in cultural intelligence development, is that the most expensive mistakes in business are caused by failing to recognize expertise that's already available to you. During her UN address, Carmen outlined the broader principles that had guided her work and explained how they could be applied to international development challenges beyond business partnerships. Cultural intelligence, she explained, is not just about understanding different customs or speaking different languages. Cultural intelligence is about recognizing that every culture has developed valuable knowledge and approaches that can benefit others, and that sustainable solutions to global challenges require combining insights from multiple cultural perspectives. She described how her methodology had been used to address international development challenges in education, healthcare, environmental protection, and economic development, always with the goal of creating genuine partnerships that respected local knowledge while introducing beneficial innovations. The refugee crisis, climate change, international trade disputes, and global health challenges all require solutions that respect cultural diversity while promoting cooperation, Carmen continued. These solutions will come from recognizing and combining the best insights from all cultures, not from imposing the approaches of any single culture on others. As Carmen concluded her address to sustained applause from the international audience, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from cleaning offices in Manhattan to setting policy for international organizations around the world. But more than her personal success, Carmen took pride in the broader changes she had inspired. Thousands of immigrants and international professionals had found opportunities to utilize their expertise in American business environments. Dozens of companies had improved their international performance by recognizing cultural knowledge among their employees. International development projects around the world were achieving better outcomes by incorporating systematic cultural intelligence. My story is remarkable only because it highlights how many other stories like mine are waiting to be discovered, Carmen had said during her Harvard commencement address the previous year. Every organization, every community, every nation has people whose knowledge and expertise could benefit others if we're humble enough to recognize it and wise enough to utilize it. Standing at the podium of the UN General Assembly, Carmen understood that she had achieved something more significant than personal success or professional recognition. She had proven that cultural intelligence was not just a business strategy, but a pathway to more effective collaboration between different peoples and nations. The woman who had been invisible while cleaning offices had become visible as a leader whose expertise was sought by organizations around the world. But more importantly, she had opened doors for countless others whose knowledge had been overlooked and whose potential had been underestimated. The janitor who had translated Spanish whispers had become the expert who was teaching the world how to listen to voices that had always been there, waiting to be heard and valued by leaders humble enough to recognize that wisdom comes in many forms and from many sources. What an incredible journey we've witnessed together. From that shocking moment when Carmen revealed she understood every word of the Spanish conversation that was meant to exclude her, to watching her transform not just a business deal, but an entire approach to recognizing and valuing human expertise. This story proves that assumptions about people, based on their job titles or appearance, can blind us to extraordinary knowledge and capabilities that exist all around us. Carmen's transformation from invisible janitor to internationally recognized expert shows us that intelligence, education, and valuable insights exist in every workplace and community. We just need the humility to recognize them and the wisdom to seek them out. Her story reminds us that the person cleaning your office, serving your food, or answering your phone might possess exactly the expertise you need to solve your most challenging problems. If this story inspired you as much as it inspired me, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories of hidden talent and unexpected expertise. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that every person deserves respect and recognition for their unique knowledge and contributions. And remember, you might be surrounded by experts right now without realizing it. The question is, are you paying attention to the wisdom that exists in unexpected places, or are you missing opportunities because of assumptions about whose knowledge matters?